Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, April 22nd, 2024. Today, we're going to think a little bit about what it means to be the change you want to see in the world, at our homes, at our offices, and also in our culture at large. All right, so let's hit the trails together. Come walk with me and let's talk along the way. This morning, I had tea with a new friend of mine named Matt, and he is a business leader, somebody who's prominent here in the local community, and he's also a father of two teenagers. And so Matt and I were thinking about some of the ideas in my new book, Camping with Kierkegaard, and he said to me, look, I get this notion of faithfulness as a way of life. I think that makes a lot of sense, but how is it you actually put it into practice? And he gave me a hypothetical story. He said, so many of us, especially in middle age, have friends who say, I'm going to do things differently, and then tragically have some sort of heart attack and don't even get out of bed the next week. And he said, this should, right, cause all of us to radically interrogate our ways of living, to not wait until next week, or as Donovan Woods says, not wait till next year to change things up. But how do we do that? It's just so hard. And here Matt's talking about something that I think is absolutely crucial. It's what I refer to sometimes as the inertia of the everyday. It's the idea that we take for granted that the way the world works, the way things are, and basically our place in that world is just obvious. But here, I think we can learn something important from the civil rights leaders who used to say, we must be the change we want to see in the world. And this idea, I actually think, is deeply Aristotelian. Aristotle suggests that the way we cultivate virtuous character is that we try our best to emulate those modes of living cultivated by virtuous people. He calls them people of practical wisdom. So when I was talking to Matt, I said, I think the way that we actually put this stuff into practice in our own life, where we interrogate the everyday, we think differently about the world, we become the change we want to see, we actually cultivate the possibility of change for others. When we create the possibility that others can live differently in the way we hope to live ourselves, we then actually start putting into practice and making a habit of the kind of living, the kind of practices, the kinds of thinking that we want to see in the world. We open others to their freedom and thereby live into our own. This actually is an important idea, though, I think, for all of us who in various ways find ourselves, inspirationally leading others, whether that be as a parent or a boss or a professor or even a civic or community leader. Too often, we take for granted the idea that our position of responsibility and authority requires us to then act in certain ways. Well, certainly in some respects, that's true. But here I think we can learn something from Hegel, the philosopher who says that far too often we live our lives according to a dialectic. He calls it the master-slave dialectic, but I prefer to think of it as simply the leader and the follower dialectic. In this sense, the follower is trying so hard to be like the leader, but you might think then the leader is the one to emulate. But it turns out the leader, says Hegel, is actually more or less bound to the follower, because we need them to want to be us. We require their position as what reinforces our sense of authority, our sense of leadership. What would it look like, though, if we started to change this? If we realized that the person who is supposedly in the master role or the leader role is maybe the most trapped, the least free at some existential level, because they need the others to be small in order for them to feel big. If we free ourselves up from that sense, maybe we could start modeling for our kids what it looks like to live in the way we hope that they will inherit. In this sense, we free them to think differently about the world and put it into practice in our own lives. What would it look like if we did this at our businesses, where we start saying, man, I wish I could live differently. I wish I had more time. I wish I had more flexibility. Well, put that into practice for those, in fact, who are your employees. Make that happen for others so that you then get to enact what it is you want to see. Maybe even in cultural senses, we can pull back from the influencer culture whereby those who say, do this, act like that, buy this thing, the TikTok and Instagram stars. What if we started living in such a way that our very habits are influencing others to trust themselves more, such that they don't need to turn to those influencers? They instead can look to us as the virtuous people who are inviting them to live into their own freedom, to be the change they want to see. Sadly, right, in a cultural sense, we older folk have failed to address things like gun violence, like climate change, like economic disparity, like the continued realities of racism and sexism in the world. Like, what if we started freeing up our kids from having to inherit a world marked in such ways? In other words, we freed them by being the change we want to see. We actually fixed some stuff and then handed them a world that was not quite so crappy. The problem is we tend to want others to replicate what we have chosen to do. We want them to reinforce our narrative of importance. But in doing so, we fail to make real change. So today, maybe find those that you influence and invite them to become changed by your giving them flexibility and freedom to do so. And in the process, maybe you'll also enact the things you want to see in your own life. So let's today be the change we want to see, learn from Aristotle and Hegel and Matt about how to live on purpose where we are and not wait until next year to try to do so. Thanks so much for thinking with me. I'll see you next time, unless a piano falls on our heads.